Living car-free in Las Vegas? What was I thinking? This is CityNerd, weekly content on cities and transportation. Viewer-suggested topics, always appreciated, but let's be serious. No one really suggested this because very few people are dumb enough to even consider it, let alone do it. But today's video is all about what it's like to live car-free in that most anti-urbanist of anti-urbanist places, the suburban Sunbelt of the United States. Now, a lot of you know I'm currently based out of the Las Vegas area. And like a lot of people who live in Vegas, I'm not originally from here. I moved from Portland, Oregon in January of this year. And here's a question I get asked a lot. Why would you move from Portland, a city often thought of as a progressive bastion of sustainability and good planning, to Las Vegas, which fairly or not, is widely seen as the opposite of that? Most often, the way the question is put is, how can you call yourself an urbanist and live in a place like that? And I don't know, that kind of comment just sort of rubs me the wrong way. As if you can only be a true urbanist if you live in a certain kind of neighborhood in a certain kind of usually expensive city. I find that kind of thinking really politically limiting, and make no mistake, urbanism is political. But really, this goes to the heart of what today's video is all about, which is, can you be an urbanist if you live in, say, a Sunbelt city? And my answer to that is not only yes, but I don't think you can understand the value of urbanism if you haven't tried to live it in a place that has a lot of potential, but let's be real, is sometimes actively hostile to the idea. I believe a lot of this channel's viewers do live in places where it's very challenging to try to live car-free. And I don't feel like I could talk to all of you with a straight face if I didn't spend some time living where it isn't easy, so I could really understand the challenges firsthand. So today you're going to get the perspective of someone who's used to living car-free in a place like this, except now I'm doing it in a place like this. And you might already be questioning my sanity for even trying to get by in a place like Vegas without a car. Well, think about it this way. A city like Portland makes it relatively easy to live car-free or car-light, and when you've mostly been doing that for 10 plus years, it becomes an ingrained habit, a central feature of your existence, something you structure your life around. You just get used to certain benefits in terms of physical and mental health. Like road rage isn't in my emotional vocabulary. But also, and this is important, you get used to not having a car in your budget. Now, the personal cost of car ownership is gonna vary depending on a lot of factors, but the average household in the US spends something like $11,000 a year on transportation, and that's almost all car. I guess it depends on your personal situation. I mean, maybe $11,000 a year isn't significant to you. But for me, the meager checks I get from YouTube every month are not really enough to keep the lights on. So for me, cutting expenses down to the bone is kind of a big deal if I just want to keep this channel going. There are other more altruistic reasons to ditch your car. CO2 emissions, pollution, not wanting to maim your fellow citizens out on our poorly designed streets. You can call these externalities of driving. And all these things tend to move in the right direction when we reduce our vehicle miles traveled, or VMT. By the way, if you're thinking electric vehicles are going to be the silver bullet that's going to solve this, take a better look at this list. About the only one that changes if we transition to EVs is noise. Remember, if the electricity is coming from fossil fuel generation, which like 80% of it does, all you're doing is changing where the tailpipe is located. And a lot of the localized pollution, the particulate matter, comes from tires and brake pads, so that's not going away either. Let's dig into the psychology of car ownership and talk about what that means for VMT. So I'm going to reach back into urban planning grad school now and share the one thing I learned that really changed the way I look at this. It was in a course on travel demand modeling, which is all about how you forecast travel in a metropolitan region. This particular assignment involved a data set from a regional household travel survey, which is an important input into a travel demand model. A regional household travel survey is essentially a travel diary that gets sent out to a sample of the local population, and they track their travel for a few days. What time they make trips, their origins and destinations, whether they drive or walk or take transit, and it matches all that up to demographic and location characteristics. So our assignment was to take all these independent variables and analyze them to figure out which of them were most predictive of a household's vehicle miles traveled. And it included all the interesting, sexy things that a planning grad student would imagine have an impact on your likelihood of driving. Density, the built environment, travel options. But you know what the answer was? It's just, do you own a car or not? And that's it. It bears repeating. The biggest determinant by far of how much you drive is just whether you own a car or not. There is some effect for only owning one car instead of two, but it's modest. This is all extremely obvious when you think about it. I mean, a car is essentially a sunk cost, and once you own it, the marginal cost of making extra trips feels inconsequential. There's no price signal that tells you to drive less, other than occasionally filling up your gas tank. And I'm not going to get into this, but I submit to you that this sense that driving is essentially free after you've bought a car is a pretty intentional part of the auto manufacturer's business model. That's a talk for another day though. These other variables may have secondary impacts like your income or whether you live in a walkable area might affect your thinking about whether to own a car or not, but those don't correlate nearly as strongly as just straight vehicle ownership. This, in a nutshell, is why I advocate for car-free living. It makes a huge and positive impact on your travel behavior. Keep in mind, when I say car-free, I don't mean you don't ever use one. I prefer to walk or bike or take transit when I can, but I'll take a ride hail when it makes sense, and I rent a car or a truck occasionally when it's the right tool for the job. So the goal is not to never set foot in a personal automobile ever again. I'm not a total Luddite. But if you just begin with not owning one and go from there, you'll find that price signals really do their job. You're more likely to account correctly for the true cost of driving, and you tend to come up with more creative workarounds that save you money. In a way, doing this is a bit like going to a rehab clinic or a writer's retreat where you strip everything down and just focus on core things. You give yourself constraints. Now, constraints can have a negative connotation, but I'm talking about self-imposed constraints. What I believe is choosing which limitations to put on yourself is paradoxically incredibly liberating. You're choosing to be more focused, more creative, and more resourceful. And when you're in that mode, it's a very powerful thing. And for me, the way that manifests is just having the motivation and imagination to create borderline absurd YouTube videos every week. I realize what I'm espousing here goes directly against this country's extreme veneration for the idea of having it all. I'll just share my point of view, which is having it all is pretty overrated. Like, all is a lot to manage. And I'll just suggest that you might be happier and you might be more fulfilled if you only had a judiciously selected sum. Look, this is America. We love the concept of ownership. Being a homeowner is usually a pretty good deal, but car ownership, that's ownership of a depreciating asset. To me, it can be sort of like a learned helplessness. Does owning a car make you more free, or does it do the opposite? It depends on your perspective. The freedom of being able to travel around the region in your personal climate-controlled metal box versus the freedom of maybe living a simpler, more focused life that you feel good about and possibly having an extra $11,000 in your pocket every year. Let's get into some practicalities. I decided I was going to move to Vegas because, well, I like Vegas. I didn't do this as some kind of prank. There are cool walkable areas in the city like the Arts District or East Downtown, and I love that the airport can get me just about everywhere I want to go. But also, it was going to give me the chance to really embrace the challenge of living car-free in a place that has a reputation for being very car-centric, which is what I wanted. But as someone who's used to biking as their primary mode of transportation, I was a little worried. Well, contrary to what I strongly suspected before I got here, some places in the Las Vegas region are actually set up pretty nicely for biking. In general, the valley is pretty flat, and you have a bunch of features that lend themselves nicely to trail networks. For the city of Henderson, which is where I landed, you've got power line trails, you've got wash trails, you've got rail trails, and you've got freeway trails. And it's not perfect, but you really can get a lot of different places by bike in 15 to 20 minutes. Also, I had one pretty non-negotiable criterion, which was where I lived had to be near an outlet of a particular Polynesian-themed grocery store chain, which I managed to achieve, but going to this particular store is a little different here. The staff are always chatty, like any city you go to, but here, when they're done bagging your groceries, you know what they say? Drive safely. And the first few times I said, nah, I'm good, I rode my bike. Kind of patted myself on the back. But then they just look at you like you're certifiable, so I just stopped doing that. Okay, I'm gonna dive into some of the particular challenges that are entailed in trying to live car-free in a Sunbelt city, like the good, the bad, and the absurd. But first, quick reminder to drop a like and subscribe, and even if you have subscribed, hit that notification bell. My analytics portal is yelling at me, telling me not nearly enough subscribers have notifications turned on. I don't know. Lots of ways to get at me on social media, bonus material on Patreon, etc. Subcount check. The channel now has enough subscribers to fill the Rose Bowl in Pasadena, California. The venue dates from 1922, so back in the day, you got there by taking the Pacific Electric Railway, the red car. Now you get there the same way you get to everything in LA. Okay, let's get into some challenges, successes, and failures of my everyday existence trying to live car-free, because Las Vegas just does not make it easy. Transit. You know, I'm not really a big fan of the RTC bus stops. I mean, where do you even stand? I do like the buses themselves though. The buses are usually relatively clean and spacious. And I've relied on buses my whole life, so it's something I'm used to. But also, I've always just kind of liked the democracy of it. The bus is there for everybody. And you might say, well, the bus isn't convenient, it isn't frequent enough, and it takes longer because of all the stops. These are fair points, but there is an app that shows real-time arrivals, and yeah, the bus does take longer. But you know what? I can read on the bus. I can be on my phone responding to exasperating viewer comments on my latest video. You can't really do that when you're driving. Street design. I've talked about this in a couple of my videos, but the way streets are built here is pretty outlandish and hostile. Curb-tight sidewalks and bike lanes next to traffic that's signed for 45 miles per hour. I don't know, is malpractice too strong a word? As a person walking or biking, because the street network is so disconnected, you really have to cross at big intersections. And I have to say, I have never seen cycle lengths like what they have here. Maybe I haven't spent enough time in the Sunbelt, but for me, 3 minutes is an absolute eternity to spend standing on a pedestrian island next to a slip lane. The bike network, one thing you'll see in other cities is maybe a network of neighborhood greenways or bike boulevards, usually built around low traffic residential streets. That more or less does not exist in Vegas. Local street networks are disconnected by design, so you really do have to rely on paths and on bike lanes that are on very, very busy arterials. And north of Henderson, I don't even know how to get north. Can we just dedicate one traffic lane on one arterial anywhere in this area to create a two-way protected bike lane that gets you from central Vegas to the southern part of the valley? I want to say something about the area being anything but paradise for biking, but I'm already at my dad joke quota today. Heat. Somebody should have warned me it gets hot in Las Vegas. July and August are brutal, but biking in Portland is pretty terrible in December and January, so trade-offs. For me, I'd say about 9 months of the year in Vegas are pretty good for biking, and I'm even game for the other 3 months. It's a dry heat. Although that's kind of its own problem, because what I finally realized was this kind of heat wicks the moisture off you faster than your body can produce it. And then you don't realize you're dehydrated until you're like out on the Pittman Wash Trail and you start hallucinating. It's not good. Anyway, always bring water. Always. Debris and other hazards. Always having to watch the pavement in front of me for shrapnel. Definitely in bike lanes, but especially on pedestrian islands, which is kind of wild to me. Another challenge, the local vegetation. In my first month of biking in Vegas, I got more flat tires than I get in like 5 years of biking in Portland. I could not figure it out until I finally found the culprit. It's these goat head thorns that are like steel barbs. Seemed bad, so I went to a local bike shop to ask how people around here deal with it. And I ended up with a pair of new gator skin tires and some goopy stuff to put in my inner tubes. Only one flat since February, so strong endorsement for Swanee's cycles. Bike parking. This is like a daily challenge that I always have to find creative solutions for, because most places, bike parking just does not exist. Just about anywhere I go, I basically assume I'm going to be walking up to whatever fixed object I can find, usually a signpost for an ADA parking spot. Like, I love that this place has a cute bike planter out front, but not an actual bike rack. Mothership coffee, though, always wins. So, living car-free, I do recognize it's not for everyone. People work cross-town, people work swing shifts, people have kids, they have to get to school safely, and people can't always choose or maybe afford to live in walkable, bikeable areas. But I strongly suspect more people can do this than the 3 or 4% that currently do. It all comes down to your perspective. Does owning a car make you feel more free, or does it do the opposite? Does it instill habits that are consistent with the kind of life you want to live, or with, I don't know, the kind of planet you want to leave to future generations? Or, and maybe this is the key, how much do you care about what other people think? And in particular, what's your tolerance for awkward interactions with the checker at Trader Joe's? Last thing, cities like Las Vegas always have planning efforts going on that can help make things better for people who want to live car-free or car-light. So figure out how to get on a citizen advisory committee or something. But I'd also say, if you're waiting for things to be perfect before you try to reduce your own car dependency, it's a good chance it's just never going to happen. In other words, if you're waiting for Las Vegas to become Amsterdam, well, that's a pretty tall order, and besides, Las Vegas is already busy being Venice, New York, and Paris. That's all I got. Thanks for joining, and thanks to the patrons who help make it possible for me to keep pumping out these videos while maintaining the Spartan lifestyle I've become accustomed to. Keep at it with the great topic suggestions down in the comments. I'll be back with a new video next week, and I'll see you then.